The topic for today's video is the Rama, Rabbi Moshe Isserles. He was born in the year 1530 and passed away in the year 1572. He was born in Krakow, Poland, and he passed away in Krakow, Poland as well. His name, Rabbi Moshe Isserles, the Rama is the acronym for that. Comes from his father's name was Yisrael, Israel, so became kind of like Yisrael's son, Rabbi Moshe Yisrael's. That's where that name came from. There's a story told about his father that he was a cloth merchant, and one time there was a special order came from some sort of nobleman, and it was Friday afternoon, and his custom was always to close his shop on Friday at the noon, as it says in Jewish law that afternoon on Friday a person should get ready for Shabbos, and this nobleman was taking his time making this big order, and he ends up telling him, "Listen, I'm closing. There's no ifs, ands, or buts." And the nobleman was perturbed, or the nobleman's person who was helping him or making this order was very perturbed. In the end, he lost the business, but he kept Shabbos. And the saying was that in the reward for doing this thing of closing his business, his son Rabbi Moshe ends up writing a commentary on the Shulchan Aruch, which we'll talk about in a second, called the Mappa, called the tablecloth, kind of in tribute to his father's sacrifice for Shabbos in his cloth business and his, what they say nowadays, his shmata business. So the tablecloth was kind of in tribute to that as well. At any rate, he was raised in Krakow, and eventually he goes to learn in yeshiva in Lublin by Rabbi Shalom Shachna and ends up becoming his son-in-law. His wife passes away at a young age, and he remarries, and he ends up coming back to Krakow to be the rabbi there. The Rama Shul in Krakow was extant until, I believe, World War II. I believe the Nazis destroyed it. I don't think it's in existence anymore. And eventually he leaves the Jewish community there and passes away in the year 1572 on Lag BaOmer. And on his grave, it says, similar to the Rambam's grave, it says, Mimoshe Lemoshe lo kam kamoshe, from Moses of the Talmud / Moses of Maimonides, there has never been another great Jewish person like there's never been somebody as great as this Moses. Rabbi Moshe Isserles is probably most well known for his Mappa, his commentary on the Shulchan Aruch. But before we get to that, he first wrote a sefer. He wrote a book called the Darkei Moshe. Even before that, he actually wrote a book called the Toras Chatos, which was kind of his expositions on Jewish law. Eventually, he writes this Darkei Moshe, which is a commentary on the Torah, similar to the Beis Yosef, but a little bit different style, much more short, concise. Because again, his main long version essays are in the Toras Chatos, and the Torah commentary, his commentary on the Torah is much shorter compared to the Beis Yosef. He's just kind of giving comments, mentioning other things that are not mentioned in the Torah. In this book of Jewish law, he brings them in his Darkei Moshe. He intended on writing a code of Jewish law, but eventually the Shulchan Aruch shows up, and he had a decision to make, and he ends up deciding that if he were to write another code of Jewish law, which would be accepted by the Ashkenazi Jews in his area, there would be kind of two Torahs in the Jewish people. There would be the Sephardic version and the Ashkenazi version. And Rabbi Moshe makes the decision he's not going to write his code of Jewish law, and instead he's going to write glosses, commentaries on the code of Jewish law. And he writes what's called the Mappa, the tablecloth, because again, the Shulchan Aruch means the set table. So how do you adorn a table with a tablecloth? So he writes these little glosses, and what he writes, basically any Jewish Ashkenazi rabbis that were not mentioned by the Mechaber, by Rabbi Yosef Karo in the Shulchan Aruch, he will bring their opinions in the Rama, in the Haga'os, these glosses that on the Shulchan Aruch. And it's actually, once it was printed in, I believe after his passing, it was printed together with the Shulchan Aruch in 1574. And since then, every single edition of the Shulchan Aruch since 1574 has his glosses on them, actually in the text. So they're written with the Shulchan Aruch is written in block letters, and then the Rama is written in kind of Rashi style cursive script, so you know which one is which, but they're literally in the same text, and you read it together. And that, like this, there is really only one code of Jewish law for all Jewish people. He also is very into customs. We mentioned in the previous videos how the Maimonides, as well as the Beis Yosef, the Rabbi Yosef Karo, and the Shulchan Aruch are not so into writing down customs, versus the Rama will write, "This is the custom in our lands," which apparently he was criticized for because he lived in Krakow in Poland, and it seemed that he was speaking for for Ashkenazi Jewry, and many of the German Jews, or in Bohemia and the other part of the Ashkenazi areas, were saying like, "Oh, this is Polish customs; these aren't Ashkenazi customs." I did read that somewhere. I'm not sure how accurate that is, though it is interesting. He also he also was very into quoting certain. There were very specific books that he wanted to quote, and that the Beis Yosef either did not see, or because they were Ashkenazi, did not quote, like the Levush, Rabbi Mordechai Yafi, the Shari Dura, the Tumer Sedeshen, the Isser V'Heter, Ha'aruch, all these very famous Ashkenazi codes, which I'm sure we'll get to another time, the authors of these books, and like we said, customs. He also talks about things that are kind of his one of his comments are very relevant to Ashkenazi poverty that he lived in, that he experienced, and weather. Just a simple example of this. Again, it's not really explicit, but it's kind of implicit in the situation where the Beis Yosef says that when it comes to the Shabbat of Parshas Zachar, which is the Shabbat before Purim, he says you have to go to Shul, and even if you live outside, you have to walk and you have to get there. Now, the Shabbat before Purim in Poland would have been very cold and could be snowy, it could be impossible to go. So the Rama says, in a case where you can't make it, it's okay. Right? This is just very common kind of things, a lot of halachas of what you do when you don't have a minyan. The Rama mentions, again, because the Jews were very poverty-stricken, lived in small villages, a lot of them owned, these kind of taverns and those kind of things outside of Jewish communities, and now they have to get to one and they don't have a minyan. Therefore, the Rama will tell you what to do in those situations, in addition to the Ashkenazi culture. Even his laws about kosher cows is relevant to the weather and the illnesses of the cows of Poland, compared to the cows in Spain, Constantinople, and in land of Israel. Eventually, he was also part of the Vad Ha'arba Aratzos. He was part of the how do you say, the Committee of the Four Lands, which was basically a self-governing institution that the Jewish people had in those years. Kind of fell apart shortly after in the 17th century. Fell apart after, especially once the partition of Poland happened in the 1770s. But there was like a self-governing thing where the Jewish people were able to have their own laws and their own institutions. That was kind of these four lands together. He was part of that governing body. And just we'll end off with a short. Before we end off, we'll also mention many of his tshuvos were printed after his passing. His responsa were printed after his passing, and he was also a tremendous Kabbalist. He does mention the Zohar as well in some of his works as being the Word of God, and he's clearly influenced by. Though I do not believe we have any Kabbalistic writings from him. I love with a small story that in Krakow on the night after the night of Purim, the night following Purim, he would himself knock on the doors of every single Jewish house in town to remind them to pray the evening service. Consistent with his ruling in Shulchan Aruch, in the Mappa, that the meal should be done towards the afternoon. So therefore, people were drinking and being merry, and sometimes would forget to pray. So he wouldn't go around himself to knock on the doors of every single home to remind them to daven Ma'ariv, to daven the evening service. So just a tremendous, you see how this person was one of the greatest leaders of his generation, receiving questions from throughout the Jewish world, and he didn't find it beneath him to remind people to pray the evening service. So we'll end it off there. Thank you very much for listening. If you have any questions, comments, something that I could have said, should have said, please leave it in the comments section below, and we'll see you next time.